Lauro, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I, where do we begin? I would love to have you introduce yourself in whatever way you want to take that today. Can you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Amazing. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Lauro, um, and I'm a trail runner. I'm a software engineer. I'm an educator. I'm an advocate. And I'm a lot of things. Yes. And
You
yeah,
are a lot of things. It's
I'm a
very true.
footprints alumni. And
We did just meet a couple weeks ago, probably helpful for the audience to know. We met a couple weeks ago in Vermont, in the woods, in at Footprints running camp. I was like hesitating to say it like that because I feel like Dakota has been very clear about it's Footprints camp, but it's not as much about running always. It's a climate action camp, and there's running involved, which was something that we discovered while we were there. Can you, though, because right before we hit record, you were talking about a
yeah,
really interesting piece of your own life. Because I asked Lauro, who I met as Lauro, I asked, is your name pronounced Lauro or Lauro? And
yeah,
like, I think it's really, yeah. And you were talking about this, and then I said, wait, we got to hit record. So I wanted to ask you again, can you, if you feel comfortable sharing, do you mind sharing a little bit about your two names? I'm putting air quotes around that you just described, kind of the
yeah,
two personalities.
yeah. Of course. Okay, so I'm a first generation. Like, both of my parents immigrated from Mexico. I grew up here and in the States, and like my name is like Laurel. Like that's like how you pronounce it in English, but how you pronounce it in Spanish, it's Lauro. And so like growing up, like since like I don't know, since you remember like your first name and how you pronounce your first name, you say it like in your native language. So I grew up with Lauro. And then like I went to school. I remember like going to school and realizing that like people aren't able to pronounce my name. And I think you're like in first grade, you're in school, you can advocate for yourself and tell like your first grade teacher, hey, actually that's not how you pronounce my name. And so like I think just like through school, outside of family, outside of like friends, outside of like anything related to like speaking Spanish, like I was like Laurel. And it's so interesting because I feel like those are two different distinct persons at times, right? Like one is like really good at masking, one is like really good at presenting, one is really good at like being like an extrovert, and then the other one's like I don't know, it's like very like warm, very like grounded, very like and yeah, and very different. And I think that speaks to just like being able to carry two sets of cultures. And yeah, and
Wow, I really appreciate you sharing that, and I like so appreciate you sharing that. And I think that we did just spend a week of time together where we shared a lot and we shared a lot of emotions. We both of us here in this conversation, but also with then how many that would that be, like 15 other people, 14 other people. And I think that the camp experience really, for me at least, just broke down so many barriers, brought us all really close. But even those are the kinds of things that like I didn't know about you, and I feel like we got so close, and yet that's just that experience with all of us together. I think just scratched the surface clearly because those are the kinds of stories that, because I'm not asking you just about a story or a part of your childhood. I'm asking you about like a core part of your identity, I feel. And you're sharing like, oh, I have these two pronunciations that sort of lead to like almost two different personalities. So anyways, I really appreciate you sharing and was curious about that myself. That's how this started. Was I basically said, well, I want to know if I'm saying your name right.
yeah,
And it led to all of this being shared, which is incredible.
and Laura or Laura, whichever one works, like both are welcome. And I think it just like speaks to like for me, I think this last couple of years has been about expansion, about like
Mm.
personal growth, about embracing the parts that I haven't embraced. in the past, and that means like um, yeah, like my culture, my language, my like heritage, and that you kind of like as a person that grows here, as a person of color, as an immigrant that grows up in the U.S., it's really hard to embrace that because you're
Yeah.
surrounded by different messaging that tells you you shouldn't. And I think that's been like a big like project, like internal personal project of me, is to embrace those pieces and
Yeah.
figure out like who I am, and without like just like completely um, forgetting one like side of me
Yeah.
that's like uh, that's definitely me. And so and maybe that
Definitely.
touches on a little bit like into our conversation ahead of like the BIPOC trail running community that I like, yeah, that I've been working on with you, and that's the start of footprints. And yeah, but I'll
Yeah.
let you guide this conversation.
I absolutely. Well, I feel like already I know we could go in several different directions and I could talk to you for many hours, which we'll try to condense into one recorded conversation of about an hour. But I initially, well, so this project, this podcast, this kind of media series where the climate things are, I think I mentioned it at camp a little bit. But it really is focused around climate solutions, climate action in the outdoor industry. But as you know, I have a background and a deep interest in also trying to make, even as a white, well, especially as a white person, make the outdoor industry even more inclusive, or not even more inclusive, I would say, like more it less homogenous than it really is, because it's exceptionally homogenous. So I do want to ask you about kind of like a climate action question, which is how I open the podcast, but I'm going to actually put that aside for a second because I
Yeah,
do want to go back. I want to go into your, again, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, but your upbringing and your kind of like where you grew up, and family connections, and all of this, because I think it's been interesting. What you just said reminded me of something that someone on the Trailhead podcast said, and we've heard a couple times actually, is especially immigrant children, or like children, first generation children, who pursue activities in the outdoors and maybe camp and sleep outside and run on trails. Like their older generations, parents, grandparents, have said to them, we've heard, like, oh, well, why are you choosing to sleep outside? Like, we worked really hard so you don't have to sleep outside. Or like, we worked really hard so you don't have to like run on trails or like be outside in the woods running away from something, right? So it's like there's this safety element, there's this sort of like, cultural element of, well, why would you choose to be outside when you like don't have to be, kind of thing. So anyways, that was just something that came up for me when you were starting to share about your upbringing. But I was wondering if you would share a little bit more and
yeah,
like tell us about where you grew up, and anything you want to include about your family too.
yeah. I think that's like something really like that speaks to something like deep, and in terms of like distinction between generations. And
Mm.
because my parents like immigrated when they were like in their mid 20s, they had two kids, like me and my sister, uh, and they been like working like for like 15, 20 years. They like work really hard to give us like all the different possibilities and all the resources that we needed to like grow up healthy, have education, have different possibilities, more possibilities than both of my parents. And I think that's like a pattern of different different life experiences of children of immigrants, right? Where like the parents worked a lot, and like they sacrificed a big piece of their life, and then us like having this privilege, this possibility to have free time, to have like the ability to go camping, to go and like run, and that's like a big personal investment of our time. Like how much time do we like spend running? Like if you want to train for like a 50K, which that's something that I'm doing, that requires like so much time running. That's like so much, and yeah, and it almost feels a bit selfish, right? It's like investing in something that like just kind of seems silly. Like I'm just like gonna run in the forest and the trails, and train for this, like train like a couple of 100 hours for it, and it seems selfish, and I think that's something that I'm um, trying to be okay with, trying to change the narrative and perspective of where that idea is coming from, and in approaching this in a way that like yes, like to a very like narrow perspective, running can be a selfish endeavor, but and it can also lead to different possibilities. I think I also bring like a lot of like my and like values that I grew up within my family of like generosity, about bringing a community together, about like helping others, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that, like in the trail space, in the running space, um, like my like I don't know, and yeah, and yeah, there's something very special, and when you grow up in such a like close knit community, and whether it's your family, extended family, like and other people that you share like culture and language with, and then having this like experience of going out into the world like as an adult and realizing that like that doesn't like necessarily exist out there, and so yes, and I think I'm trying to figure that out. I'm trying to figure out so many things, and trying to deconstruct that narrative and flip it into something that can be um, yeah, be something, be a source for empowerment for others for good.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, from
Okay, that's foreshadowing a lot about what we will talk about today. So I'm gonna leave that for a second because I want to hear
yes,
about what you're up to next with your idea that came out of camp. But one thing I did want to ask is a little more shifting back to kind of this idea around environmental action, climate action, which take that as you will, because a lot of times too, I talk with people and the word climate I think is quite like either academic or polarizing or very liberal or however you want to say it. And I think what I mean by environmental action, climate action is something POW Protect Our Winters talks about, something Faith and I have talked about in our films before is access, or it's clean air, clean water, and access to green spaces. And sort of this like
mm,
it's a basic, we hope is a basic right for everybody, is a basic thing that we can make sure that folks have access to. And yet here we are in this climate crisis where we're dealing with a lot of these really scary possible outcomes. And I was just wondering what your kind of aha moment on environment was. Is it something that has been a specific time where you like realized that you needed to take action, or has this been growing in you for a long time? Because you ended up, the reason I asked this is also you ended up at Footprints, which maybe you had a different idea, which I want to ask you about too, what your idea was coming into Footprints. But yeah, well, what's been your
yeah,
aha moment on that?
yeah. I think something like that like I've been thinking about like for the last couple of years is like not necessarily like on climate action, and but most a bit more focused on like environmental justice,
Hmm.
and from the lens of access.
Hmm.
And I shared this story at Footprints. Like I discovered trail running a bit more than like 3 years ago, and despite living in the city of Portland, and like one of the biggest hubs of like for any like running community, whether that's road, trails, track, and this is like a hub for running, and I like never knew like that there was such thing as like trail running as a sport, as an activity, as a hobby, and as a vehicle for personal growth. And despite like living next to like one of like the most amazing places, it's called Forest Park. It's right next to the city. You have access to like a massive trail network. It's like 80 something miles of trails. Like it's a playground. If you love trail running, this is a playground for you. And and I didn't discover that until 3 years ago, despite like having like lived my whole life here next to it. Like, yes, I had done some hikes, I had explored, like, but I hadn't really like discovered like the whole trail community, and I think that speaks to climate action, because I think before you can have climate action, you need to have a relationship with them, with
Mm,
the outdoors. If you can't have a relationship with the outdoors, it's really hard for you to
mm,
care about the climate, to care about taking any action that like benefits the climate. And I think that was my aha moment when
mm.
I like started running through Forest Park. When I started like connecting to that place, I'm like, I deeply care about this place. I this has given me so much. How can I give back to
Hmm.
this place? And not just this place, like uh, yeah, and beyond Forest Park. And
Hmm.
how can I take action to protect this? And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
not sure
that's
that
really that's really
that's.
powerful.
I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I
yeah. That's a go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
I think that's so powerful, and I really appreciate you sharing that. And it's something that you know I know has built is building up the foundation to your great idea, which we'll get into. I keep teasing this. This is probably one of the things I do the most in podcasts. It's like I'm like, well, later we'll talk about this other really cool thing. Okay, but quickly before we do,
Yeah,
I'm curious what so just for listeners that don't know, with Footprints, which was the experience, the camp that we just attended together. I was a mentor, you were a camper, and
yeah,
campers. I think there's not funny names, like they're great names, but they don't necessarily encompass like all of the multitudes that all of us contain coming to like I felt like I learned more from all of you than anything else, etc. So I think that was that yeah that's what's interesting is that we have folks who come into camp with ideas, and then we have folks that come into camp that are more in the capacity of kind of guiding those ideas or helping parse through issues and challenges. Those are kind of more of the mentors. And so but correct me if I'm wrong. Well, also we should say that you are like I'm your specific mentor that you were matched
yes.
with, which
We
is
need
very
to disclose
exciting.
that.
That yeah, we should just close. Exactly, we should just close to everybody. But before we were matched, like before you came to camp, what? Because I think your idea was different, right? Like
Yeah,
this new idea you have, which we'll get to. My gosh, I keep really teasing it. But like you had that while you were there, or you maybe built it out while you were there. But I think you applied with a different idea. I was just curious if you wanted to like
yeah.
talk about that a little bit.
And
Yeah.
I think I applied with this idea of creating education around gardening.
Yes.
And
Okay.
like I called it ultra hardiness, just because bringing in like the piece of ultra running and trail community, and then hardiness, like, right, like that's translation for Spanish to
Mm-hmm.
gardens.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think that was also a key component of me like having this like and before and after, and having planted a garden like changed my perspective around like um around the climate, around environment, around diet, like that. It felt so empowering to like plant some seeds and then like wait a couple of months and then have like food that you can eat and like cook with and just nourish yourself with. And that was so powerful. And I think there wasn't like I'm pretty sure there still isn't like education around how to garden in Spanish, and there's like a big Latin
Mm-hmm.
community that not everybody's has like the ability to go and like search for education around gardening that's in Spanish. So I wanted to create that, and I think that was like my initial idea that when I like submitted my application for Footprints, and
Yeah.
and that evolved. I think that's the core of that is still serving like how can I serve my community,
Mm-hmm.
and like the idea evolved, the project evolved, but I think that still remains very true. And maybe I can talk about my project.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Or yes.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, no, I'm gonna officially ask you like to tell us about your project. I think what's really cool about that though, what you just shared is I was just reading the one of the books we read for camp was What If We Get It Right by
Yes.
Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. And she talks about in one of her chapters, she talks about climate victory gardens, which is a kind of a spin-off of the victory gardens of I can't remember which like movement or era this was from. I think it was actually like in like a time of war in the US though,
Yeah,
like where there people were planting gardens to like supply fresh fruits and vegetables to families and communities, to make sure that nutrition was sort of kept up. And I thought that was really interesting that now there's this climate victory garden movement, um, related to regenerative agriculture, which is about, again, providing either food for yourself or food for your community. And how, and just I've just been struck by the vast array of climate solutions. This, gardening, personal
yeah,
gardening, like small grassroots scale gardening being one of them, and also community building and movement being another. So this leads me to ask you about your current idea, which we've been teasing a lot. I would love it if you would talk a little bit more about both like what it is, but also if you could talk about the moment at camp that you kind of were
yeah.
like, I'm gonna change. I'm gonna do this other idea I have. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I can talk about like footprints and my
Yeah,
perspective
great.
that I had
Yeah,
about
great.
it, like before, and then when actually like you show up, like on the first day, and you're like,
Yes.
"Whoa, this is
Oh
like not
yeah.
what I was expecting."
I'm actually so curious about this. Yeah.
I like I was following like the several runners, and I saw several posts about footprints, and it looks amazing. Photos look amazing. You're like out in camp. There's people, and I'm like, this is cool. I am gonna sign up. I have an idea, and and I think my like just initial assumption was I'm gonna go learn about a bit of the environment and do a bunch of running, and make new friends. And what I didn't realize was that yes, there's that component, but there's also a component of like just like going deep into a lot of systemic issues, and how that affects all of us individually, and not just in the context of climate action, and also being like having the ability to understand like that we feel that we're in power, like that we have the
Hmm.
abilities to um, take actions that like benefit our community in the context of climate
Hmm.
action, and just like that empowerment was like so so yeah, so powerful. And it's when I got back from footprints, I like had such a hard time like putting words to it, because it's like there's like nothing like it.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a transformative experience, and I know transformative like it's like a very like overused word, but it is
Sure.
like that,
Yeah,
that's
it
what it
is. Yeah.
means.
Yeah,
And I
totally.
think the key moment, and when like I started putting all the pieces together, was we had this activity where you had three circles, and you're supposed to create a list of the things that you're good at, and the things that the world needs, and
Hmm.
the third one was the things that you
Joy.
enjoy, the things that you love, and and I just like couldn't see how like my initial idea, the one that I applied to, like fit into that, into those three components. But what I did notice was that when I started listing out all the things that like I'm good at, that I love, that the world needs, and like everything started clicking together, and I think that was like right. I love trail running. I love the community, and like what I'm good at. I love building communities. I love building products. I love technology. I love just like the ability to be able to create from scratch. And then like the third one, right? What does the world need? What does my community need? And I think that speaks to just like the local running community here in Portland. And yes, Portland's like a great hub for running, but it's also and definitely not diverse when it comes
No.
um, to running communities, and I just saw a huge gap. Like, and I want to create a community that empowers more people that look like me to go out and run, right? More people of color to be able to take to the trails, to explore Forest Park, to enjoy all like the benefits, all like the joy that I've perceived since I discovered it. I feel like that's like a hidden gem, and like right in the center of the city that like very few people get to discover. And I think that's because there's a lot of barriers, whether that's cultural, systemic, like economical barriers to being able to go and have those like experiences. And yeah, and
Yeah.
feel free to.
No, no, no. I mean, I want to ask you about like the mechanics of this, of what you're setting up, because also this
Yeah,
is like me as the mentor being like, tell us all about your strategic plan.
yeah,
But what I think is really interesting first is that the fact of like connecting back to what you said about, if we're not bringing welcoming people into the outdoors, there's not like a connection to the space to want to protect it, to want to conserve it, to want to, you know, bring
yeah,
more like just positive environmental outcomes for a region. And I think what you're doing, what I see your, I don't want to call it a camp. You're gonna have camps. I don't want to. Yeah, you can talk about that. But like what I see your idea becoming is this method to, yes, provide inclusivity and community, but also to start to say, hey, I belong here. I see myself here, and I also want to protect the spaces that I've gotten to access. And so like I think that was really, we need so much more of that. Like to your point about the Venn diagram, like what do we need? What brings you joy? What are
yeah,
you good at? Like, oh my God, full +1 snaps to you being good at creating community and bringing people together and being such a light in this world. And you're also like touching on something we desperately need: more diversity, not only in like the outdoor industry in general, but also in the environmental movement. And I think you're
yeah.
doing so much with this idea. So just, but yeah, I would love to hear more about like what this looks like for you. Like, tell us what Tierra Libre is.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Not to give the name away, I just gave it away.
yeah, Addie, giving uh, the name away.
I was like trying not to drop it, and then I was like, no, let's do it.
We've
Let's
been
go.
hiding the lead
I
this
know.
whole time.
Yeah, I know.
Um, but the name of the project, the project that I got to work at Footprints is called Tierra Libre and Run. And so it's Tierra, which translates to earth, and Libre, which translates to free. So you can think of it as like almost like free trail. And
That's right.